And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby 411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is the last MLR Power Rankings for the 2022 season. And let's just say, let's get the elephant out of the room. As a LA Guillotines fan, definitely the season ended on a huge down note. The recent announcement, along with Austin Gilgronis being disqualified from playoff competition, LA has followed in suit as being disqualified. Again, Major League Rugby has not really made it known exactly what has been involved. As as a as the creator of this YouTube channel, I never want this channel to be based around rumors or hearsay. Kind of want things to play out with true facts because that's how news should work. So I'm not going to exactly go into any details. I've debated a lot about doing a YouTube video about my thoughts because there's a lot of them as a Guiltinis fan, but part of this should be a little bit biased. I know I play a lot about my fandom, but it really, again, especially considering the details aren't exactly clear of what's going on. So I'm not going to say too much, but as always, these power rankings really have nothing to do with what's going on outside. It really is about what happens on and off the pitch. And that's why your new number one team, it's going to be kind of shocking because of everything that's going on. And the way that the playoffs have now worked themselves out, which we will go into detail more when we talk about our picks for next week. Again, the power rankings are really about how teams perform on the field that day, on the pitch. So making the playoffs, final standings, especially with how things went down this season, really don't play too much. But yeah, and again, also too, because this is the last power rankings for the season, we are going to compare my standings here with my way too early picks that I made at the beginning of the 2022 season and see how they compare. It's not pretty to be honest. But let's go into this week's power rankings. So, unfortunately, the team that has been pretty consistent comparatively to everybody else in almost a negative way, number 13 from almost the start of the season to the end, the new kids on the block, the Dallas Jackals. Again, throughout the season, they really have become my second favorite team to the LA Guiltinis because, throughout the season, they really had a lot of horrible luck. There is that freakish accident, we still don't know what happened, that took out 9 of their players. They've been dealing with trying to put a team together kind of at the last minute. Obviously, being the new kit team, they don't have that cohesion compared to all the other teams. So, I predicted, I think, them to have at least one win, but it's not too far fetched to believe that they would end the season winless. You didn't want to see it, but it did happen. They lost to Utah 5-33 in their final game of the season. Not much more to say to that, except maybe next year, year number 2 will be a nice turnaround for Dallas now that they have more cohesion. Hopefully they'll bring back a lot of their core players because there's a lot of talent on that team. So it's not like Dallas is a completely hopeless franchise. It's just some growing pains for them. So Dallas stays at number 13. Another team that struggled a lot this season, number 12, the NOLA Gold. A team that I did predict would also struggle a lot. It didn't help that you had one of their best players you had some of their good players just not being able to be consistent on the team. So, it's not surprising to see them struggle a lot. And they ended up losing their last game to Rugby Atlanta 45-19. It started pretty competitive, to be honest, until about the 50th minute when Atlanta just really took the game away, scoring 3 straight tries near the end of the game, and NOLA really didn't have much answer back. So NOLA ends the season pretty much near the bottom of the power rankings pretty consistently throughout the year, and they end at number 12. Number 11, dropping down a couple of spots, are the Toronto Arrows, another team that struggled to find consistency. There are little streaks of them kind of getting better, but at the beginning of the season, they struggled a lot, and now at the end, they kind of fizzled out. Again, you got to give it to them. They last year they were the team that was on the longest away trip ever. Being able to come back to play at York Lions Stadium in Toronto does definitely help. But again, another team that has struggled a lot with inner adversity. So the Toronto Arrows end the season playing against a very, very high-powered offensive team, the Old Glory DC. I predicted a lot of points from Old Glory, and they did not disappoint, 50-33. Unfortunately, no records were broken in this game, though it was pretty damn close. In the end, Toronto started off going toe-to-toe with Old Glory. It was actually pretty competitive. But again, just like with NOLA in their game, 4 unanswered tries at the end to Old Glory pretty much put this game away. And the Arrows slide down to number 11. Also sliding down just one spot, the Houston SaberCats, which is, might shock quite a few people considering they are now hosting the Western Conference Championship game. They earned the number 1 spot after all the turmoil with Austin and LA being eliminated. But to be honest, again, with the way that things happen on the field, Houston has really slid quite a bit. I mean, you had last weekend where they barely were able to get those 2 bonus points that they needed against the Seattle Seawolves, and then in this game against Austin, 29-14 was the score. And to be honest, Houston really looked lost in that game. Austin, at that point, was already announced to have been eliminated from the playoffs. It was surprising to see if Austin would even show up, but they definitely looked like the best team in the West in that game, and I'll talk about it more in the power rankings. But Houston definitely kind of having some troubles. There's a lot of talk about a lot of their players being pretty beat up and injured, so hopefully this bye that they earned by getting the number 1 spot will allow them a chance to heal up. But right now, Houston is struggling as they are entering into the playoffs. And again, with rugby, or with like most sports, you kind of want to peak more near the end of the season. You don't want to just barely make it into the playoffs, which, to be honest, Houston kind of is. So right now, number 1 seeded team in the West is close to the bottom at the number 10 spot. Number 9, the one team that benefited from not playing at all and actually earned themselves a spot into the playoffs, San Diego Legion. We'll go a little bit more into details of what to expect from them with their playoff game and the return to the playoffs when they were eliminated twice in the last couple of games. Hopefully a lot of their players who might have been booking trips back home or getting ready for their vacation didn't go too far, because they are now back into the playoffs. They are going to be playing against the Seattle Seawolves. From the bye, they moved up a spot because Houston's performance, I felt, allowed them to slide past San Diego. So San Diego is at number 9. Going up a couple of spots after their impressive win, or not necessarily impressive win, but a very high-powered win, is Old Glory DC. Again, a fun team to kind of watch and analyze. Winning 50-33 over the Toronto Arrows. Again, it's a team that had a lot of high-powered offense, but not a lot of consistency until, oddly enough, they got rid of their head coach. Once there's the new regime in power, Old Glory started looking a lot more focused, a lot more driven. Defense is a little questionable, but, the offense... if they can produce that next year with a little bit more focus, Old Glory could easily be a very dangerous team to compete against next season. They scored 8 tries in this game, but they did allow 5 tries to be scored against them. So again, Old Glory, maybe defense is something that they might need to look and work on in the offseason, but right now their offensive weapons have been amazing, to say the least. The biggest slide, unfortunately, as an LA fan, is this one, dropping all the way from number one. Your reigning and now no longer defending MLR champions, the LA Guiltinis. Unfortunately, a double whammy of a weekend for them. Not only do they lose to the Seattle Seawolves in the last game at home, was watching that game, and unfortunately it was very unfortunate loss at the Coliseum. Biggest turnout for us, but also very disappointing for the fans to go home with a loss. They lose to Seattle Seawolves 35-27. To be honest, it was a typical game, not taking anything away from Seattle. Seattle definitely wanted it more, but there was a lot of inflicting wounds that LA did, a lot of sloppy play, and even Coach Hoyles said it, that LA definitely did not look motivated. Possibly because there's the understanding at the time that LA had the number one spot already locked up with the elimination of Boston from the playoffs. So LA really didn't have a lot to play for, except for maybe getting the overall number one spot with a win. But even if they lost to Seattle, wouldn't have changed the fact that they'd be hosting the Western Conference Final. Unfortunately, though, after the loss to Seattle, it was then revealed. We're filming this on Tuesday. It was revealed Monday that it was revealed earlier this morning that LA has also been disqualified from the playoffs. So that ends LA's season. So again, a double whammy, a loss to Seattle, and being eliminated from the playoffs. So LA will not be able to defend their championship in the playoffs. It's very unfortunate. But on the bright side, as a LA fan, very, very proud of the boys, and they played very well this season. A lot of every team had a lot of injuries, but LA had a lot of injuries. A couple players, DTH Vandermeer, Matt Gitto, never got to see the field this season. So a lot going against them, but again, so did everybody else. But LA played great LA rugby. Hopefully we'll see that next season. And again, don't want to go into any more rumors or hearsay, but we're hoping for the best with whatever the situation is going down with Austin and LA and Major League Rugby. So, but again, bottom line, LA drops from number 1 down to number 7. Dropping a couple of spots is the number 1 overall team in the playoffs, the New England Free Jacks, dropping from number 4 to number 6. A surprising loss to Rugby New York. It was a close game. It was a very defensive game. Free Jacks lost 14-21. You can't say that New England didn't start their best team. I mean, they had all their players started. It wasn't like they were giving their players an off time, even though they had the number 1 spot locked up throughout the playoffs. But they definitely had a lot of their starters play. It just looked like Rugby New York played a smarter game, a smarter, tougher game. So, New England, definitely that's a little bit of momentum ender for them. They've lost 2 out of the last 3 games, which is not good going into the playoffs. But again, number 1 overall seed, they have a bye to kind of regroup, reheal, and get ready to play the winner of Rugby Atlanta and Rugby New York. And speaking of Rugby New York, going up a couple of spots from number 7 to number 5 is Rugby New York with that very good win over the Free Jacks. It was a very tough defensive battle, as I mentioned before. But again, New York just seemed to outplay New England, which should give Rugby New York a lot of momentum going into their playoff game against Atlanta. Granted, they're playing in Atlanta against a team that has historically been more on top of them. But again, you just took out the best team in the league. So again, a lot of momentum going in for New York as they go over to Atlanta to play in the Eastern playoffs. Moving up moving up 1 spot from number 5 to number 4 are the Utah Warriors. Another team that has really played good rugby the last couple of games, and again, kind of showing the mark of a team that should have been been playing this kind of rugby throughout the season, so I don't know where the inconsistency was, but because they started peaking at the right point, even though they're out of the playoffs, they've moved up to number 4 with their win over the Dallas Shackles. Now, granted, it is the Dallas Shackles, and they won 33-5, but that's why they only moved up one spot. But with their prior couple of wins, Utah has been looking like a very dangerous team. And honestly, if they've made the playoffs, it would have been interesting to see how far Utah would have went. Now, your number 3 team, having a huge win over the LA Guiltinis. Moving up from number 6 to number 3 are the Seattle Seawolves. Seattle has just, again, another team that's been peaking at the right time. They started the season hot and then completely started falling. And then in the last couple of weeks, they're a decisive win over Houston, a decisive win over LA. Seattle is looking like a very, very tough team to beat. That's really going to help them with the momentum going in with their game against their eternal rival, the San Diego Legion, a team that beat them in the 2019 MLR Championship. I'm sorry, a team that they beat in the 2019 MLR Championship. So, Ken, that should be motivation for Seattle. Plus, they're going back home to Seattle to play that game. Should be again, Seattle is a team with a lot of motivation. I honestly, right now, looking at it on paper, and I'll go more into this details in the video when we talk about our picks for next week. I see out of these 3 teams, just by the rankings itself, that Seattle looks like the team that has the better chance of making it to the championship game. Now, who are they going to play in the championship game? Well, it could be this team, Rugby ATL, who are at number 2. Rugby ATL with a very dominant win over NOLA Gold, 45-19. Now, again, because it was NOLA that they beat, I didn't feel the right to move them into the number 1 spot. Also, there's a reason for that because of the number 1 team. But Rugby ATL, again, another team that's looking very, very good. But, again, I'll go into this when I talk about my picks video. ATL dominated over a team like NOLA. New York, though, beat a team like the Free Jacks. One would say that New York might have a little bit more momentum, but the game is going to be played at Silverback Stadium for Rugby ATL, that home field advantage. If I'm remembering correctly, ATL dominated Rugby New York back in Week 16, 38-3. So ATL has a lot of momentum going into their favor, and I use the word momentum a lot because rugby is all about momentum, and right now that is in favor of Rugby ATL, who could possibly make it in the championship game. A team that unfortunately will not make the championship this year, but is our number 1 team in the power rankings at the end of the season, is Austin Gilgronis. Austin was the first team to be announced to be disqualified from the playoffs. Despite that, they showed up and played a dominating game over the Houston SaberCats. Honestly, throughout the week, they looked like the best team in the league. And that's why, they are number 1, regardless of the fact that they have no shot at the playoffs, at the championship. They looked like the best team. So it would be interesting to see how things would have turned out if both Austin and LA made the playoffs. As an LA fan, I'll admit, I was very happy when I heard Austin was out of the playoffs because Austin was definitely a team I did not want LA to face against. Now both teams are out, so. But that's how it is, So these are the playoff power rankings for the end of the season, the last power rankings of the 2022 season. It's kind of sad with that, but let's compare this, and I'm going to pull up the rankings at the very beginning, my too early predictions for 2022. Bam. And this is why you don't make these too early predictions. As you can see, to be honest, I'm not completely off. There's little groupings where things are similar, but, there's only 3 teams that I got completely correct. Predicted Atlanta to be number 2. Predicted Old Glory to be number 8. Actually, 4 teams, I'm sorry. And then NOLA and Dallas to be at the very bottom. So those panned out. But then the rest of the teams are kind of all you know, but if you look at it, they're relatively close. Like Austin, I predicted to be number 3 behind LA. Austin ended up being number 1. The LA one and the Seattle one are the ones where I'm really, really off. I predicted, of course, LA to be number 1. They ended up number 7. I predicted Seattle to have a really tough season, number 10, but they boosted themselves up to number 3. Oddly enough, at the cost of each other, Seattle and LA was it. But everybody else, relatively close. You know, I predicted Utah to be number 6. They ended up number 4. New York, I predicted to be 4. They ended up 5. New England, I predicted to be number 5. They ended up dropping down to number 6. And then San Diego, I predicted to be number 11. They're up to number 9. Houston, I predicted to be 7. That one might be a little bit of a drop. 7. Houston ended up being number 10. And then the Arrows, I predicted number 9. They ended up being number 11. So again, not too far off. LA and Seattle are the only 2 teams I feel I completely missed the mark on. And honestly, that is purely because of that game. If LA did not lose to Seattle, their rankings might be a little bit more similar to my early predictions. So that game really cost me in the end. But again, this was a lot of fun. I know a lot of you guys have enjoyed this video, which I really do appreciate because it's been a lot of fun making these videos. And it's not as easy as one would think of putting these power rankings. You know, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of thought that goes into it, but there really was. And again, as much as it looks like just randomness sometimes, I'm really happy. I've been very happy with every way the power rankings has ended, because it really does feel to me like this is the order of strength of the teams as they finish the week. And this is where they look like right now as we're going into the playoffs. So, again, we're going to figure out who we feel might go further in the playoffs with my next video. But again, I appreciate you guys watching. This is the last power ranking videos for the 2022 season. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you will stick around for the playoffs, regardless of how things have kind of played out. As an LA fan, I'm still going to be watching the playoff and the championship game because I still love the sport of rugby in itself, and hope that things might turn out a little bit better for everybody involved next year. So, anyway, thank you very much for watching my video. Hope you enjoyed it, and as always, I will always be seeing you on the pitch.